The scorching sun beat down on the parched earth, a relentless reminder of the unforgiving Arizona territory. Dust devils danced on the horizon, swirling like phantom riders, carrying with them the whispers of a land both beautiful and brutal. In this vast, untamed expanse, where life clung precariously to existence, a young woman faced a challenge that threatened to shatter her world, a challenge that would test the very limits of her courage and compassion. Her name was Clara Vance, and she was a nurse, though the rough-hewn settlement of Redemption Creek offered little in the way of proper medical facilities. Her small, makeshift clinic, a lean-to fashioned from canvas and salvaged lumber, served as a beacon of hope for the ailing and injured. Clara, with her steady hands and unwavering spirit, had become the town's unlikely guardian angel. She arrived in Redemption Creek months ago, drawn by an advertisement for a nurse in a burgeoning mining town, a place desperate for medical aid. She quickly discovered the true nature of her calling here: to bring healing to those forgotten by civilization, to stand as a bulwark against the ravages of disease and despair. But Redemption Creek, for all its rugged charm, held a dark secret, a looming threat that overshadowed every sunrise. A mysterious fever, swift and merciless, had begun to sweep through the isolated mining camps, striking down men, women, and even children with terrifying speed. It was an illness unlike any Clara had ever encountered, defying all known remedies, leaving a trail of fear and desolation in its wake. This wasn't just a local outbreak. It was a silent, creeping epidemic threatening to wipe out the entire population of the scattered settlements, including Redemption Creek itself. Clara, driven by an unyielding sense of duty, had dedicated every waking moment to understanding and combating this unseen enemy. She meticulously documented symptoms, experimented with every available herb and concoction, and tirelessly nursed the afflicted, often working until she collapsed from exhaustion. The stakes were impossibly high. If she failed to find a cure, if this fever continued its relentless march, Redemption Creek and every soul within its boundaries would be lost. Her own life, her purpose, everything she had built in this harsh land, hung in the balance. This was not merely a fight for survival. It was a desperate race against time, a battle for the very soul of the frontier. Clara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was the last line of defense. The fate of an entire community rested squarely on her shoulders, a burden she carried with quiet determination. She would not, could not, fail. The stagecoach was due any moment, bringing new hope, or perhaps more despair. The dust swirled in lazy eddies around the stagecoach stop, kicked up by a relentless August wind. It carried the scent of dry earth and distant sage, a familiar perfume to Clara Jenkins. For 2 years, this isolated outpost on the edge of the Arizona territory had been her world, a world defined by the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels and the desperate hope of weary travelers. Clara, a nurse by trade and a healer by calling, had seen more suffering and more resilience in these sun-baked miles than most saw in a lifetime. Her days were a relentless cycle of tending to saddle sores, patching up barroom brawls, and delivering babies in the flickering lamplight of makeshift clinics. But today, the usual rhythm was broken. A profound weariness, deeper than any she'd known, had settled into her bones. The last few weeks had been a blur of relentless work, a virulent fever sweeping through the scattered homesteads like wildfire. She had barely slept, her hands constantly moving, her mind constantly racing, fighting for every breath of every patient. Just yesterday, a young mother, barely out of girlhood, had succumbed to the fever despite Clara's tireless efforts. The image of the woman's 2 small children, their faces streaked with tears, haunted Clara's every waking moment. It was a loss that chipped away at the sturdy resolve Clara usually possessed, leaving her feeling brittle and exposed. The weight of it, combined with the sheer physical exhaustion, had become unbearable. She had been standing by the hitching post, waiting for the afternoon stage, her vision blurring at the edges. The sun beat down mercilessly, a hammer on her skull. The world around her began to tilt, the horizon line wavering like a mirage. A dull roar filled her ears, drowning out the distant jingle of harness bells. Clara tried to steady herself, to push through the sudden wave of dizziness, but her legs felt like lead, unresponsive to her will. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and the ground rushed up to meet her with alarming speed. The last thing she registered was the sharp, metallic tang of dust in her mouth before darkness consumed her. When consciousness began to return, it was a slow, reluctant crawl. She felt the rough texture of wool beneath her cheek and the faint scent of leather and something else. Something clean and sharp, like gun oil and pine. A low murmur of voices reached her, indistinct at first, then slowly resolving into words. She just collapsed. A gruff voice was saying, "Right there by the post." Looked like she was about to drop for a while now. Another voice, deeper and strangely resonant, replied, "She's a nurse, isn't she? Been working herself to death with this fever." Clara tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. A cool cloth was gently pressed to her forehead, and the sensation was heavenly. She managed a weak groan. "Easy now," the resonant voice said, closer this time. "You took a tumble." She finally forced her eyes open, blinking against the harsh sunlight that streamed through the open flap of what appeared to be a canvas tent. A man stood over her, silhouetted against the bright opening. Tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn duster. His face was in shadow, but she could make out the glint of something silver on his belt. A gunslinger, she thought hazily, her mind still muddled. He knelt beside her, and his face came into clearer view. Sharp, intelligent eyes, a strong jaw, and a neatly trimmed beard dusted with the same trail dust that coated everything else. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that suggested immense control. "How do you feel, ma'am?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his imposing stature. Clara tried to speak, but her throat felt parched. She managed a raspy whisper, "Thirsty." He nodded, and a moment later, a canteen was held to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, and she drank deeply, feeling life slowly seep back into her. As she finished, he took the canteen away, his touch brief but firm. "You're Clara Jenkins, aren't you?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "The nurse." She nodded, pushing herself up slightly, though her head still spun. "Yes." "And you are." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Just a traveler. Heard about your work. Heard about the fever, too." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, a look of quiet assessment in his eyes. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. This town needs you, I gather." Clara managed a weak, tired smile. "They do, and I try." He stood then, towering over her. "Indeed you do. But there's something else, isn't there? Something beyond just the fever." His voice dropped, becoming almost a murmur, yet it held an undeniable authority. "I saw the look in your eyes, Clara Jenkins. The kind of look a person gets when they've lost something irreplaceable. Something you're not ready to talk about, but something that's eating at you." Clara's breath hitched. He had seen right through her, straight to the raw wound of her grief for the young mother. The casual observation, spoken with such quiet certainty, felt like an invasion, yet also strangely like a lifeline. She felt a prickle of tears behind her eyes, a dangerous vulnerability she rarely allowed herself. He extended a hand, his fingers strong and calloused. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question, but a statement, delivered with an unshakable resolve that left no room for argument. "There's a place not far from here. A place where you can truly rest. A place where the fever hasn't reached. And a place where you might find something you've lost." Clara's eyelids fluttered open, the world around her still a hazy watercolor of exhaustion and disbelief. The voice, deep and resonant, seemed to cut through the fog that had enveloped her. She had been on the precipice of unconsciousness, the relentless pressure of grief and fatigue finally pushing her past her limits. Now, a stranger stood over her, his silhouette framed by the harsh desert sun, offering not a question, but an unyielding directive. you're coming with me." It wasn't a cue, tie-in, but a statement delivered with an unshakable resolve that left no room for argument. "There's a place not far from here. A place where you can truly rest. A place where the fever hasn't reached. And a place where you might find something you've lost." The words hung in the air, a peculiar blend of command and compassion. Clara struggled to focus, her mind still reeling from the sudden shift from the brink of collapse to this unexpected confrontation. She blinked, trying to clear the lingering haze from her vision, to make sense of the man who had appeared as if from the very dust itself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a worn leather duster that seemed to absorb the light, and a hat pulled low, obscuring most of his face. Yet, even in her weakened state, Clara sensed an undeniable strength emanating from him, a quiet authority that brooked no challenge. A flicker of defiance, a spark of the stubborn resilience that had carried Clara through so many hardships, began to stir within her. She was a woman who stood her ground, who faced down disease and despair with an unwavering will. To be swept away like this, without a choice, felt profoundly wrong. Her throat was dry, her voice a mere croak when she finally managed to speak. Who are you?" The question was barely audible, but it carried the weight of her exhaustion and her inherent need to understand. The man didn't answer immediately. He simply knelt, his movements fluid and unhurried, and offered her a canteen. The metal was cool against her parched lips, and the water, though tasting faintly of leather, was the most refreshing thing Clara had ever known. She drank deeply, the cool liquid a balm to her burning throat, and with each swallow, a sliver of her strength seemed to return. She could feel the subtle tremor in her hands as she gripped the canteen, a testament to how truly depleted she was. When she finished, the man retrieved the canteen, his gaze, though still shadowed by the brim of his hat, seemed to soften slightly. "My name isn't important right now," he said, his voice still low, but with a gentler cadence. "What is important is getting you to safety. You're spent, Clara. Anyone can see that. And this place, this stagecoach stop, it's no longer safe for you." He gestured vaguely to the surrounding desert, to the empty horizon that offered no solace, only more of the same relentless struggle. Clara's brow furrowed. How did he know her name? She hadn't introduced herself. A shiver, not of cold but of unease, traced its way down her spine. Yet, beneath the unease, there was also a strange sense of relief. He saw her exhaustion, he understood her vulnerability. For weeks, Clara had been the rock, the unyielding force for everyone else. Now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, someone was looking at her, seeing her need. "The fever. It's spreading," Clara whispered, the words catching in her throat as the image of the young mother's children flashed in her mind. "People need me. I can't just leave." The thought was agonizing, a betrayal of every principle she held dear. Her duty, her calling, tethered her to this harsh land and its suffering inhabitants. The man stood, his presence once again looming over her, but without menace. "They won't have a nurse if you're gone yourself, Clara," he stated simply, his logic unassailable. "You can't help anyone if you're broken. And you are breaking. I've seen it before." His words were not accusatory, but observational, delivered with a quiet certainty that resonated with the truth Clara had been desperately trying to ignore. His eyes, now visible beneath the hat's brim, were a startling shade of blue, ancient and knowing, reflecting a wisdom that seemed to stretch far beyond his years. He extended a hand large and calloused, offering not assistance, but an invitation. "Come on, Clara. It's time." Clara's gaze flickered from the outstretched hand to the stranger's startling blue eyes. There was no demand in his gesture, only a quiet certainty that resonated deep within her, a recognition of something she hadn't known she was waiting for. The dust swirled around them, an indifferent witness to the silent exchange. She felt a tremor, not of fear, but of anticipation, as if a long-dormant part of her was stirring awake. The exhaustion that had weighed her down for weeks, the crushing grief over the young mother she couldn't save, The sheer weariness of her endless fight against the fever, for a fleeting moment all of it receded, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. Time for what? Clara's voice was a dry rasp, barely a whisper against the wind's low moan. Her throat felt parched, her body still heavy with fatigue, but a spark, faint yet persistent, had ignited within her. She was a nurse, a healer, accustomed to giving orders and taking charge, yet in this moment she felt an inexplicable pull to follow, to trust. The man's presence was a stark contrast to the familiar chaos of the stagecoach stop. He was an anchor in a swirling storm, his stillness profound, his gaze unwavering. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of warmth in his otherwise stoic demeanor. His hand remained extended, a silent invitation, a promise of something unknown but undeniably compelling. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple, making the world around them seem both vast and intimately personal. Clara looked around at the deserted stop, the empty corrals, the silent stagecoach, a stark reminder of the isolation she had grown accustomed to. Her life had been a series of battles fought alone, a solitary vigil against the harsh realities of the frontier. But now, this stranger, this quiet force of nature, was offering a different path. Without another word, Clara slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against his callous palm. His grip was firm, warm, and reassuring, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in her heart after the fever claimed its latest victim. As their hands connected, a jolt, subtle yet undeniable, passed between them. It wasn't an electric shock, but rather a profound sense of connection, a feeling that destiny itself had guided this moment. The weariness that had threatened to consume her seemed to dissipate, replaced by a surge of unexpected energy. It was as if his touch had reignited a dying ember within her, reminding her of the strength she possessed, the resilience that had carried her through countless trials. He didn't pull her up abruptly. Instead, his strength was a steady support as Clara rose to her feet, her legs still a little unsteady. The world didn't spin, but it shifted, subtly yet irrevocably. Standing beside him, Clara felt a strange sense of equilibrium, a balance she hadn't realized she'd lost. His presence was a quiet comfort, a solid foundation in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his, trying to decipher the unspoken message in their depths. There was no judgment, no pity, only a deep understanding that seemed to transcend words. "Where are we going?" Clara asked again, her voice a little stronger this time, a flicker of her usual resolve returning. The question was less about a physical destination and more about the journey that had just begun, a journey she knew, with a sudden, profound certainty, she was meant to take. The stagecoach stop, her world for so long, suddenly seemed small, a mere dot on a much larger map. The memory of the young mother, the countless patients, the endless struggle, it was still there, a dull ache, but it no longer consumed her. Something new had entered her life, something that promised not escape, but a different kind of fight, a different kind of healing. She was Clara, the nurse, the healer, and now, perhaps, something more. The stagecoach rolled into view, not with the usual cloud of dust, but with a surprising quietness, its wheels muffled by the recent downpour. Clara stood by the makeshift clinic, her heart a steady drumbeat against her ribs. She had spent the morning preparing, her hands moving with a newfound certainty as she packed her medical bag, not for a routine house call, but for a journey into the unknown. The decision, made in the quiet hours before dawn, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitable pull. She was going with him, the mysterious gunslinger who had awakened something dormant within her. He emerged from the stagecoach, his silhouette framed against the bruised sky. His eyes, usually shadowed, held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before: anticipation, perhaps even a hint of vulnerability. He offered her a hand, his touch firm and reassuring. As she stepped into the stagecoach, The familiar scent of leather and dust filled the air, but it was now mingled with the subtle, earthy smell of rain-soaked earth and the faintest hint of something metallic, like gun oil. The world outside the window began to blur, a canvas of rolling hills and distant mesas, each mile taking her further from the life she had known, closer to the one she was now choosing. Their destination was a remote mining camp, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place where the fever raged unchecked, far from the reach of conventional medicine. Clara knew the risks. She had seen the devastation the sickness wrought, the way it stole breath and hope alike. Yet, a strange calm had settled over her. The weariness that had once clung to her like a shroud had lifted, replaced by a fierce determination. This was not just about healing others. It was about proving something to herself, about stepping into the fire and emerging stronger. The journey was long, punctuated by the rhythmic creak of the coach and the occasional jolt as they traversed rough terrain. He spoke little, but his presence was a comforting anchor. Clara found herself studying him, observing the subtle shifts in his expression, the way his gaze swept the horizon, ever vigilant. She realized that beneath the stoic exterior, there was a profound sense of purpose, a quiet strength that mirrored her own. They were two solitary figures, drawn together by a shared mission, bound by an unspoken understanding. As they neared the camp, the air grew heavy with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something sickly sweet and cloying. The sounds of human suffering, faint at first, grew steadily louder: coughs, moans, the hushed cries of children. Clara felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was why she had come. She was Clara, the nurse, and this was her battlefield. The camp was a desolate sight, a collection of ramshackle tents and crude wooden shacks clinging precariously to the side of a barren mountain. Figures moved slowly, their shoulders slumped, their faces etched with despair. A chill wind swept through the camp, carrying with it the undeniable chill of fear. Clara's breath hitched in her throat, but she pushed the fear down, deep inside. There was no room for it now. He led her to a large, makeshift tent that served as the camp's infirmary. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of sickness. Bodies lay on cots, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes glassy with fever. A few camp residents, their faces grim, moved among them, offering what little comfort they could. The scene was worse than anything Clara had imagined, a stark testament to the fever's merciless grip. A wave of dizziness threatened to overcome her, a ghost of her own recent collapse. For a fleeting moment, the weight of it all, the sheer enormity of the task, threatened to crush her. She saw the faces of the young mother and her children, felt the familiar pang of grief and helplessness. But then, a hand touched her arm, a steadying presence that brought her back to the present. She looked up, meeting his gaze. In his eyes, she saw not pity, but a quiet strength, a silent challenge. He believed in her. Clara took a deep breath, pushing past the initial shock. This was her moment. This was why she had followed him, why she had risked everything. She was Clara, the healer, and these people needed her. The challenge was immense, the odds stacked against her, but a spark of defiance flickered within her, growing into a steady flame. She unslung her medical bag, her hands moving with purpose. The real fight was about to begin. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. Clara, her face smudged with dirt and fatigue, pushed a damp cloth across the brow of her last patient, a young boy whose fever had finally broken. A wave of profound relief washed over her, a physical sensation that made her knees weak. She had done it. Against all odds, against the relentless grip of the fever, she had brought them through. The makeshift clinic, once a cacophony of coughs and moans, was now quiet, save for the gentle breathing of the recovering patients. Clara moved among them, checking pulses, adjusting blankets, her movements precise despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on her. Each face she saw, no longer contorted by pain but softened by sleep, was a testament to her unwavering resolve. The image of the young mother who had succumbed to the fever, the one that had haunted her for days, began to recede, replaced by the faces of those she had saved. The weight of that loss, though still present, no longer crushed her. She had fought back, not just for herself, but for every life that hung in the balance. Her medical supplies, once overflowing, were now nearly depleted, a testament to the sheer volume of cases she had handled. The last of the quinine had been administered hours ago, the final bandages applied. She looked at her hands, raw and chapped, but steady. These hands, the same hands that had felt so useless in the face of despair, had now brought comfort and healing to an entire community. The spark of defiance that had flickered within her had indeed grown into a steady flame, burning brightly through the darkest hours. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light over the land, the first sounds of awakening began to stir outside. A rooster crowed, a dog barked in the distance, and the faint murmur of voices carried on the breeze. Clara stepped out of the clinic, blinking in the bright light, her eyes adjusting to the vast expanse of the Arizona territory. The air, crisp and clean, filled her lungs, a stark contrast to the stifling heat and illness of the past weeks. She saw them then, emerging from their homes, from the wagons parked nearby, the families she had served, the men, women, and children she had fought for. They moved slowly at first, tentatively, then with more purpose, as they saw her. A quiet reverence settled over the group as they approached, their faces etched with gratitude. There were no grand speeches, no effusive declarations, just a profound, unspoken acknowledgement of what she had done. A grizzled old rancher, whose grandson Clara had pulled back from the brink, stepped forward, his eyes, usually hard and wary, now soft with emotion. He simply nodded, a gesture that spoke volumes. A young woman, clutching her baby tightly, offered Clara a small, hand-stitched pouch filled with dried herbs, a precious gift from her garden. Each gesture, each silent glance, was a thread in the tapestry of their shared ordeal and her ultimate triumph. Clara felt a surge of emotion, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had faced the overwhelming odds, the relentless fever, the despair that threatened to consume her. She had risked everything, pushing past her own limits, drawing on a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The battle was won, the community was safe, and Clara, the healer, stood tall, a beacon of hope in the vast, untamed wilderness. Her journey was far from over, but this chapter, this grueling test of her spirit, had reached its triumphant conclusion. The last fever broke with the dawn, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Clara stood at the window of the small clinic, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and rose. Her hands, once trembling with exhaustion, now felt steady, imbued with a quiet strength. The past weeks had been a crucible, forging a new resolve within her, a deeper understanding of her own resilience. She had faced down the creeping tendrils of despair, nursed her community back from the brink, and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. Word of her unwavering dedication had spread like wildfire through the scattered homesteads. Families she had saved, children whose lives she had touched, began to arrive, not with ailments, but with offerings of gratitude. A farmer brought a basket of freshly laid eggs, his eyes filled with a reverence that humbled Clara. A young mother, the one whose baby Clara had delivered just weeks before, shyly presented a small, hand-stitched quilt, its colors bright and hopeful. Each gesture, each word of thanks, was a balm to Clara's weary spirit, a testament to the profound impact she had made. One afternoon, as Clara sorted through a new delivery of medical supplies, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was the mysterious Gunslinger, his silhouette framed by the harsh midday sun. He no longer carried the same air of guarded detachment. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible softening had settled around his eyes. He didn't speak, but simply placed a worn leather pouch on her counter. Inside, Clara found a handful of rare, medicinal herbs meticulously gathered and carefully dried. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgment of her courage and skill. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze, and offered a small, genuine smile. The unspoken understanding between them was a new kind of connection, born from shared peril and mutual respect. The Stagecoach stop, once a place of desperate arrivals and hurried departures, began to transform. The community, bound together by the shared ordeal, started to rebuild not just their health, but their very infrastructure. Clara, no longer just a nurse, became a central figure in this renewal. She organized a system for sharing resources, established a rudimentary school for the children, and even helped to plan for a more permanent, well-equipped clinic. Her vision, once focused solely on immediate survival, now stretched towards a future of growth and prosperity for this remote corner of the territory. As the weeks turned into months, the memory of the fever began to recede, replaced by the vibrant hum of a community reborn. Clara still faced challenges, for life in the Arizona territory was never truly easy. But now she met them with an unshakable confidence, knowing she had faced down her deepest fears and emerged victorious. The weariness that had once threatened to consume her had been replaced by a quiet joy, a profound sense of purpose. One crisp autumn evening, as the stars began to pepper the vast desert sky, Clara stood outside the clinic, gazing out at the land she had come to call home. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant campfires. She thought of the young mother who had succumbed to the fever and the children she had left behind. The pain of that loss still lingered, a tender ache, but it was no longer a crushing weight. Instead, it fueled her resolve, a constant reminder of the preciousness of every life. Clara had found her true calling here, not just as a healer of bodies, but as a protector of spirits, a beacon of hope in the wild, untamed West. Her journey was far from over, but this chapter, this grueling test of her spirit, had reached its triumphant conclusion, leaving Clara forever changed, forever strong. Clara watched the last dust cloud settle, the wagon carrying the defeated outlaws disappearing over the horizon. A quiet stillness, a peace she hadn't known in months, descended upon the valley. The air, once thick with tension and fear, now carried only the scent of pine and damp earth. She looked at the faces around her, the relieved townsfolk, their eyes no longer shadowed by apprehension, but alight with a fragile hope. Their gratitude was a palpable warmth, a silent testament to the courage displayed. Her gaze then found Silas. He stood a little apart, his silhouette etched against the setting sun, a figure of quiet strength. The mystery that had once shrouded him had lifted, replaced by an understanding born of shared peril. He wasn't just a gunslinger. He was a protector, a man whose quiet vigilance had saved them all. The journey from that fateful stagecoach stop, from her fainting spell and his gruff command, had been long and arduous. It had tested her resolve, pushed her beyond every boundary she knew, and ultimately redefined her. Clara had arrived in this valley a nurse seeking a fresh start, naive to the harsh realities of the frontier. She had been a woman who believed in healing, in mending, in the gentle touch of care. Yet, this ordeal had forced her to confront a different kind of brokenness, one that required more than salves and stitches. It demanded courage, resilience, and an unwavering belief in justice. She had learned to stand firm, not just with her medical bag, but with her convictions. The fainting spells were long gone, replaced by a steely composure she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced down fear, not with a weapon, but with the quiet power of her presence, her unwavering care for the wounded, and her steadfast support for those who fought. The valley, once a place of uncertainty, now felt like home. The clinic, once a mere building, was a sanctuary of healing and renewed purpose. She had come to heal others, but in the crucible of conflict, she had healed herself, shedding the vestiges of a past life and embracing the strength forged in fire. She was no longer just Clara, the nurse. She was Clara, the woman who had helped save a town, a testament to the quiet heroism found in unexpected places. Silas turned, his eyes meeting hers across the fading light. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was a silent acknowledgment, a shared understanding of all they had endured and overcome. The journey had been perilous, but the destination, this newfound peace and purpose, was profoundly satisfying. The future of the valley, once uncertain, now stretched before them, a canvas of possibility. And Clara, standing tall and resolute, was ready to help paint it.